That is who that's who his audience is now, and that's all he cares about. But elections that's not the only people that matter. So we'll see.
No, it's all right. It's not at all the electorate that is going to be voting in all these states in a couple of months. So may he just stay in his narrow little prism where everybody tells him he's a good boy. We'll see. Yeah. We'll see if that happens. Anyway, we'll keep covering it. It's great to see you in D.C. earlier today, too.
Yeah.
Okay. As you all know, because maybe you were watching, maybe you've been clicking on Blue Sky or wherever you're looking, it is a big election night in 6 states where voters cast their ballots in a bunch of key primary races. We're following all of them. Polls have now closed in most of those states. Results are coming in. They've been coming in. They're going to keep coming in. We're going to keep bringing you updates. And there are a lot of important races that we're following tonight. I'm going to go through a bunch of them here so you know what we're tracking. In Georgia, 3 Republicans have been locked in a bitter primary battle to see who will run against incumbent Senator Jon Ossoff. And remember, Jon Ossoff, he is one of the most, if not the most heavily targeted Democratic incumbents on the ballot this year. And we're going to learn at least more tonight about who he may face in November. We're also following the results from both the Democratic and Republican primaries in Georgia's crucial race for governor. Also in Georgia, we're getting results from the 2 hotly contested races for seats on the state's Supreme Court, after 2 liberal-backed candidates received very big endorsements from former President Barack Obama and former Vice President Kamala Harris. But the most closely watched race tonight was probably the Republican primary for Kentucky's 4th congressional district, where Donald Trump and his billionaire allies waged quite a retribution campaign to unseat conservative incumbent Congressman Thomas Massie. And tonight, the Associated Press projects that Trump-backed challenger Ed Galbraith has defeated Thomas Massie in that primary. Nearly $33 million, I should note, was spent in that race, making it the most expensive congressional primary race in history. Donald Trump was so determined to oust Massie, he personally attacked him multiple times on Truth Social just in the last few days at events, and on X, calling him things like the worst congressman and a rhino, and urging voters repeatedly to replace him. He even dispatched his Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, to campaign for Massie's opponent, of course, while the country is in the middle of a war. The point is this. It's clear that Trump really wanted Thomas Massie out of office. And tonight, after his backers spent millions and he had used his own bully pulpit over and over again to attack Massie, he succeeded. So why did Trump spend so much energy to defeat a conservative congressman in this Republican primary? Well, I think Thomas Massie actually said it best himself.
I vote with Republicans 91% of the time. And the 9% I don't, they're taken up for pedophiles, starting another war, or bankrupting our country.
That about says it all. Thomas Massie is one of the most conservative members of Congress, but he has refused to stick by Donald Trump on 2 fundamental issues, very big ones this year, where Trump has betrayed his own MAGA base. I mean, Massie co-sponsored the resolution that forced the release of the Epstein files, and he's been a vocal critic of the administration's efforts to cover them up. You see him there on the screen with a bunch of survivors. And he's also opposed Trump's war with Iran and even co-sponsored the War Powers Resolution to end that war. Tonight in his concession speech, Massie touted his work on exposing Epstein's enablers and co-conspirators and hinted that there may be more to come.
We need basic decency. That's what the Epstein Files Transparency Act was all about. By the way, today is the 6-month anniversary of the Epstein Files Transparency Act. We've taken out 24 CEOs, an ambassador, a prince, a prime minister, a minister of culture. And that was just 6 months. I got 7 months left in Congress.
That guy does not seem to be slinking away. He almost seemed gleeful about the 7 months he has left in Congress to do a lot more on that particular issue. So, yeah, I mean, the guy has been a very loyal conservative on nearly every issue. I probably disagree with him on a lot of policy issues, a whole host of them, maybe the majority. He's also been a huge thorn in the side of Trump. And that is why Trump wanted Massie out of office. So for Donald Trump, tonight's primary is supposed to be all about loyalty. I mean, he wants to show that Republicans who are not unflinchingly loyal to him and his administration will pay a price. That's what it's about. He's already ousted Republican Senator Bill Cassidy for his heretical vote to convict Trump over January 6th. And he did the same to several Indiana state lawmakers who bucked his agenda on redistricting. The message is supposed to be that the only way to stay in Trump's good graces is by showering him with praise, supporting whatever he does, and telling him he's just amazing all around. But here's the thing. It doesn't actually always work like that with Trump. Now, don't get me wrong, Republicans who oppose Trump will probably wind up facing some mean tweets and a Trump-endorsed primary opponent, and maybe millions spent against them. Just ask Thomas Massie. But Republicans who stay loyal to Trump don't always get rewarded for their so-called good behavior either. I mean, just consider the case of Texas Senator John Cornyn, who has embarrassed himself over and over again trying to stay in Trump's good graces. In the Senate, Cornyn votes with Donald Trump 99% of the time, even more than his fellow Texas Senator Ted Cruz. He posts cringy photos of himself on social media. You see there's the one on your screen. That's him reading Trump's book, just hoping that Trump will notice him and tell him he's a good boy. Now, this year, Cornyn even introduced a bill to rename a highway after Donald Trump, but none of that seemed to matter to Donald Trump. Because despite all of that, Trump announced just today that he will endorse John Cornyn's primary opponent, Ken Paxton, in the Texas Republican Senate runoff next week. And Trump made that decision despite all of Cornyn's humiliating attempts to suck up to him. And despite the fact that Ken Paxton is a deeply flawed candidate. I mean, this guy has spent years under a massive cloud of indictments, impeachment, whistleblower allegations, repeated allegations of misconduct and abuse of office. And that doesn't even touch on the allegations of adultery from his former wife, who filed for divorce on what she called biblical grounds. So yeah, that guy Trump just endorsed, well, he might have a harder time holding onto that seat. And that's why Senate Republicans spent months trying to convince Trump to back Cornyn, and why they're now reportedly livid about Trump's decision. I mean, after Trump's endorsement, Senator Lindsey Graham told reporters that he thinks the Texas Senate race will cost Republicans 3 times as much money with Ken Paxton as their nominee. And that's money that Republicans won't be able to spend in other races, like, say, defending Ohio Senator and Trump loyalist John Husted in his race against former Senator Sherrod Brown, or defending Alaska Senator and Trump loyalist Dan Sullivan in his race against Mary Peltola. Trump isn't just betraying John Cornyn. He seems to be betraying all of his loyal, spineless supporters in the Senate. What Trump has demonstrated tonight is that no amount of loyalty can save you from Trump's impetuous decisions. Republicans can choose to stand up to Trump or worship the ground he walks on, but nothing will save them from the chaotic whims of a mad king. All right, let's get straight to MSNOW chief data reporter Ali Velshi, who's at the big board. He's been there all night. Okay, Ali, we know Thomas Massie lost, but tell us what happened in Kentucky tonight.
Yeah, lots of stories we're covering very closely in Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Georgia, Alabama, Idaho, and Oregon. But let's go to Kentucky. Very interesting night. This is the first district in Kentucky. That's James Comer. He's an incumbent, as you'd expect. He's been called with 81%, 62% of the votes in, but he's got 88% of the vote over there. But that's Kentucky 1. Let's go to Kentucky 4, which is the one you've been talking about. We now have 96% of the vote in, and Thomas Massie's losing by about 10% in this district. In fact, if you go down to the county level, you see the 3 most populous counties, which are in the Cincinnati area counties. Boone County, which is where Pete Hegseth went on behalf of Donald Trump. They say that he went on behalf of himself, but Pete Hegseth went to campaign for Ed Galrine, who is the Trump endorsed candidate. 10% gain with 99% of the vote, and Galrine's ahead by 10%. In Kenton County, again, 52 to 47. It's a little bit closer there. In Campbell County, the 3rd most populous county, again, within 5 points, but Galrine winning over there. And then one of the other more populous counties on the western side of the state, near Louisville, 89% of the vote in, again, 52-47. So it's pretty decisive. That's done. Ed Galrine is the winner in there. But there are a number of other places that are kind of interesting to watch. If you look at Georgia, there's an interesting vote going on in Georgia. It is a state Supreme Court vote. Take a look at this. There are two of them. In one of them, this is nonpartisan, but the person in blue purple here is the liberal. The person in the orange color is the conservative. The conservative being called Sarah Warren in one of the two seats. But take a look at the other seat, which is much closer. 43% of the vote is in. Miracle Rankin, the more liberal candidate, is behind by 80,000 votes. But take a look at this. Fulton County, which is the most populous county, it splits Atlanta. No votes in Fulton County yet. We've just found out that Fulton will come in probably no earlier than 11%. If you look at all the races in Georgia right now, you'll see that Fulton is not in. So we're going to see how that changes. And what you might see in that state Supreme Court race is the liberal pulling ahead. Again, if I go to the whole state and I look at the GOP primary, Burt Jones, who is the Trump-endorsed candidate, is advancing to the primary against Rick Jackson, none of them getting 50% of the vote. Take a look at Brad Raffensperger. He's way behind, coming in a very, very distant third. On the Democratic side, the Democratic gubernatorial candidate, again, 41% of the vote is in, not enough to call it. Keisha Lance Bottoms is well ahead of all her other competitors. Her lead is 230,000. She's a former mayor of Atlanta. She's at 60%. Her closest competitor is at 14.4%. Again, the Associated Press has made a decision based on information they're getting that it's too early to call that. But take a look at this. Once again, like everywhere else in Georgia, there are 0 votes in from Fulton County. There was a shooting in the county earlier today, so they've delayed voting by 4 hours. As a result, we will not start getting numbers there until 11 p.m., but that'll make a couple of the races pretty decisive. One final thing I wanted to tell you about going out to Pennsylvania, where there was elections as well tonight. The gubernatorial race there, the GOP primary has been won by Stacey Garrity. She was uncontested, but there was this movement to write Doug Mastriano in. You remember Doug Mastriano? Mm-hmm. Ran for Senate, lost by more than 20 points, but he's as MAGA as they get. Remember, he went to Arizona to try and figure out how those ninja people were figuring out their election. So interesting case here. Josh Shapiro obviously is the Democratic candidate, not only very popular, but Josh Shapiro gets a lot of Republican support in that state as well. But there was some little movement on the Republican side to see if Mastriano would run. Republicans in Pennsylvania have decided to run still a MAGA candidate, but a slightly more moderate version of one. I don't think it's going to change the math in Pennsylvania all that much in the end, though.
So many races we're watching. We're coming back to you, Allie, in a little bit to check in and see where some of these races are developing. The Georgia State Supreme Court races are really interesting. If I'm correct here, I think one of those hasn't flipped in like 100 years, but it would be a very big deal if one did. So we'll keep watching that. But thank you for everything you do. We'll be back to check in on more data. We love some data. Okay, joining me now are two of my favorite people to talk to on a big election night about politics and all the things. Tim Miller is, of course, the host of the Bulwark podcast. Jim Messina was campaign manager for Barack Obama's 2012 re-election campaign. Okay, so obviously there are a ton of primaries going on. We're going to track them all as we get results. If we get them while we're talking, we'll talk about those too. But let's just start with Kentucky. Jim, let me go to you first. What do you make of Massey's defeat? What should people take away from that? Oh, Jim, you may be unmuted.
Sorry.
Let's see if you can. Go ahead. There we go. Technology. Go ahead.
Donald Trump runs the modern Republican Party, Jen, for better or for worse. Here's a guy who has a 99% voting record with Donald Trump, and yet they still take him out because of the Epstein stuff and because he fought with him on war powers. The problem is when you own the party, the party then owns you. And in these swing races that Tim and I are looking at so closely, Donald Trump's numbers, Jen, have just fallen through the floor. He carried non-college white voters by 36 points. He's now 8 points underwater. You just don't see movement like that. So coming into November, these candidates Republican candidates are just in a terrible place because they have to continue to show the fealty you talked about so eloquently earlier, and yet try to reach out to these independent voters that are walking away from Donald Trump in almost historic numbers. That is a dance on a knife's edge that they are unlikely to be able to do in November.
Yeah, I mean, the electorate, I was talking to Chris a little bit about this. The electorate is very different from that district from what the electorate will be in November. It still does show Trump has power among his core base. Let me ask you, Tim, just about the money aspect of this, because, I mean, this was the most expensive House race in history. $33 million was spent, a lot by outside groups. APAC, there's a lot of different groups that were spending money here, I should say. It's on one sense, if you're a billionaire, I guess it could tell you, well, we could spend a lot of money and we can buy races on Trump's behalf, but resources aren't unlimited. What do you think kind of this means for the rest of the field, or as we look at the big map leading up to November?
Yeah. Well, look, I think it's pretty telling. I agree with Jim about his assessment of, what this augurs for the general election, which is not great for the party. But I kind of have a slightly different take about what we learned from the Massey result tonight. I mean, the last I looked, it was 83% of the vote was in. He had about 45%. That's pretty good for somebody that bucked Trump directly and consistently and unapologetically on a couple of core issues, being Epstein and Iran. We don't really have another example of something like this in the last 10 years with Trump. And you have Liz Cheney that votes to impeach Trump and then becomes a major Trump critic. And then she kind of runs a quixotic campaign in Wyoming where she gets absolutely slaughtered. Most of the people that step out from Trump then resign from Congress or the Senate and don't go back in front of the voters. You have people like Cassidy who will buck Trump and then pretend like they loved him all along and go back in front of the, go back into his good graces. Massey was a kind of a unique case where he bucked Trump, held the line on his position on him, ran a real race, and he loses by 10%, which isn't, it's not that close, but it's not nothing, with the most money ever spent in a congressional primary going against him. And you mentioned a lot of that was from AIPAC. There are other groups as well, other MAGA groups. To me, that shows Trump with a little bit of a weakening grasp on the party. Not that it's over, not that the party's no longer a Trump cult, but I think it's a meaningful step in a direction away from Trump's control of the party, and shows that maybe his grasp is weakening a little bit.
Yeah, that's an interesting, thank you for giving us a little uplift there. But I mean, it's true, they spent that's a huge amount of money in a House district to have spent against him, and we shouldn't minimize that. I've been dying to talk to you both about Texas, because obviously the primary is not coming up in Texas until next week. But today, I mean, this could have been a day where the guy Trump wanted to win defeated Thomas Massey, and that would have been the political news, I guess. And instead, he endorsed Ken Paxton, and the Senate is basically pissed off at him. Jim, why did he endorse Paxton? What is this all about? What's your take on it?
I think two things. One, he thinks Paxton's going to win the primary, and he wants to be on the right side. And two, he's been long criticizing John Cornyn for being a rhino and for being too close to the Democrats. That would be a very big surprise to any Democrat who's dealt with John Cornyn. John Cornyn's voting percentage with Donald Trump was 99.2, Jen. So, I don't think he's exactly a rhino. But what I think it means, back to your money point, is that this race is going to be another $100 million the Republicans are going to have to put in to try to help Ken Paxton in the general election. And I know they have a lot of money, but when you spend $32 million to beat Massey, and now you're going to have to spend $100 million to protect a state where the Republicans haven't lost a statewide election since 1994, at some point this just becomes math, and it becomes really hard to protect all these incumbents. Some of the races you talked about earlier, in Alaska, in Ohio, their seat in Iowa, their seat in North Carolina. There's just not enough money if you're going to spend $100 million in the great state of Texas.
Tim, I mean, we heard from Lindsey Graham and a bunch of people in the Senate who seemed pretty irritated about this endorsement and the money that would be spent and how much money would have to be spent to get Ken Paxton over the finish line, if even they can do it. There's been this theory that it's easier for Tallarico to run against Paxton than to run against Cornyn. Now, Cornyn is also a creature of D.C., which is very unpopular. Paxton is hugely flawed and has many, many ethical problems. Where do you come down on it, and what do you think this all means for, the general election?
Yeah, I think Paxton is a slightly easier opponent than Cornyn, maybe not quite as much as the conventional wisdom is, kind of for the reasons that you lay out there. If you're a Republican in Texas, you really want to turn out the MAGA base. The number of kind of suburban Dallas and Houston Mitt Romney Republicans is withering. Some of them still exist, but a lot of them have started to vote for Democrats at this point. I think a lot of those will already be Tellerico voters. And so, I think that maybe you lose more with Paxton. But this is kind of on the margins, maybe 1% difference, maybe 2% at the most between Paxton and Cornyn. But look, I think given how unpopular Trump is, I think his numbers have to get lower. A lot depends on what the economic situation is, what kind of campaign Tellerico runs. But I think that Texas is potentially in play this year. And, the Republicans, as Jim said, are going to have to waste a bunch of money in this race. And by the way, they've already wasted a bunch of money. And that's another reason they're all mad at Trump. They spent, I think, $70 million, I'm going from memory, to try to boost Cornyn during this primary. So all of that money, was just flushed down the toilet for no reason. And we should just add for fun, what a humiliating end of a career for John Cornyn, who came into the Senate running an ad campaign where he called himself Big Bad John, and he had a big old cowboy hat on, and instead he ends like groveling for Trump's endorsement and doesn't get it anyway.
And even after he didn't get the endorsement, his post was like, "I still love you. I still love you," was basically my summary of it. Okay, Tim, Jim, stay right where you are. There's more results coming in. We're going to talk about that. A little bit also about what Thomas Massie had to say in his concession speech, which I thought was pretty interesting. We'll be right back. Tonight, Republican Congressman Thomas Massie's concession speech fit the mold of neither a typical Republican or Democratic candidate's concession speech. He touted his work on the Epstein files and railed against Fox News and Trump's war with Iran and Trump's ballroom, while in the same speech railing against vaccines and making trans jokes and toasting with a glass of raw milk. It was quite a Mad Lib, this whole speech. Now, Massie's lost tonight in the most expensive primary in American history, in a race where the president himself used everything at his disposal to try to force Massie out of office. Well, I'm sure this race will be picked apart by pundits in a lot of ways for a very long time. But tonight, Massie had a message he wanted to send about all the people who did come out to support him despite Trump and despite all the money spent to oust him.
Listen. If you always vote with the president, if the legislative branch always votes with the president, we do have a king. If the legislative branch always votes whichever way the wind is blowing, then we have mob rule. But if the legislative branch and the representatives and the senators that serve with it always follow the Constitution, we have a republic. There is a yearning in this country for somebody who will vote for principles over party.
We're back with Tim Miller and Jim Messina. I don't know about the chugging raw milk and anti-vaccines, but there were some good moments in that speech. So one of the things that struck me about that, and we just played part of it always, and Jim, let me start with you, is, Thomas Massie isn't going away. Bill Cassidy has made clear he isn't going away. After losing over the weekend, Cassidy came out against the ballroom funding and then voted with Democrats on a war powers resolution. I remember, we worked together when you were part of whipping votes for health care, and you're trying to get Republicans on board. You're trying to get coalitions together. That's true when you were Senate Chief of Staff, too. How much does that matter that you have a couple of these members, maybe more than just them, who are pretty pissed off and just they're going to do whatever they want to do right now?
Oh, it matters a lot, Jen. There's a saying in D.C., beware of elected officials with political vendettas. And I think Donald Trump is about to find out that is very true. You have two members who just got defeated for seats they care very deeply about by the President of the United States, and they still have some time to make it very clear what they think. And your Kennedy example of him voting on the War Powers Act is a great example. I think it is very unlikely that we're not going to hear a whole bunch from both of these people, and they're going to spend the rest of their term being very clear their displeasure with the President of the United States. And it's especially a big deal for Massey because Republicans barely have control of the House. They have, they can't even get people together on some of the tightest votes they have. And so if Massey starts to walk away from them, it gets even harder to do anything here. So I think we're going to be in for a whole bunch of theater. Kennedy's the same. He could start voting against all Trump's nominees, object to unanimous consent. For those of us geeks who understand what that is in the United States Senate, it means they can't do anything if Kennedy decides to stop them. So we're about to have a whole bunch of fun with a couple of members who don't have anything to lose and a bunch of free time.
Free Massey, I suppose, is where we're at here. Let me ask you, Tim. I mean, you hear these concession speeches, and it's like there is a future of the Republican Party, or there is a future party, that it just doesn't look like this. I mean, some of the things I think we've learned over the past couple of days is if you go against Trump like Massey did, you'll face his ire. But Trump abandoning Cornyn also goes to show that no amount of loyalty or sucking up to him will actually guarantee your safety in his coalition. So if you're a Republican looking to hold on to power or have power, I mean, what do you do here?
Well, you're in a pickle. I think that if you're a Republican in a red state right now, you continue to stick with Trump because that's where the party members are, even if it's narrowing, as we saw in Kentucky. I think it's a tougher call if you're in a swing state, though I noticed Trump's going to campaign for Mike Lawler, who's an ultimate swing state, or swing district, rather, candidate in New York, and so I guess he's making the bet to stick with Trump. I think that's pretty telling that he's still doing that. But look, things change in politics, and one other thing that you didn't play that happened in Massey's speech is some of the crowd started chanting at him 2028, President 2028. And I'm not going to be on here right now predicting that Thomas Massey is going to be the Republican nominee in 2028, but depending on how bad things go for Donald Trump the next 2 years, things can change dramatically. And like I mentioned in the first segment, I don't think 45% of the vote is nothing. I think people are very upset with him about the war in the Epstein files, just not enough to get to a majority yet. And Donald Trump ran in 2016, I would know better than anybody, as a direct assault on the Bush legacy in the party. Barack Obama, as Jim would know, ran in 2008, maybe not as a direct assault, but a critique of the Clinton establishment of the party, and both of them won 2 terms, not consecutive for Trump. And so, I don't know. I think that there are some interesting lessons from Massey's, result tonight, even in defeat.
Well, we'll keep talking about it, I'm sure. Tim Miller, Jim Messina, thank you both for being here and tune on all these results with us. Okay, we've got Ali Velshi. We told you we'd come back to him. He's still standing by at the big board, still vested up. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Georgia, whereas he kind of talked to us a little bit about earlier before. Democrats are coalescing around their candidates while Republicans keep duking it out amongst themselves. Some really interesting races to watch there. We'll be right back.